Tarim Talks. I'm your host, Babar Ilchi. Today I'm joined by Camilla Dosha, and I'm very excited to speak with her. Camilla, could you introduce yourself and who you are?
Yeah, sure. So I am currently a practicing sculpture and installation artist. Born and based in London. I've recently, just last year in September, graduated from a fine art in masters. And yeah, since then I've been exhibiting in shows around London, a couple of exhibitions abroad. And yeah, I've been figuring things out.
Fantastic. Congratulations, by the way,
Thank you so
on
much.
graduating. So I guess just tell me a little bit about your work. What does it mean to you? What does it embody? What mediums, forms it takes?
Yeah, okay, big question. It's always hard talking about your own work, but yeah, here it goes. Again, I mentioned I'm a sculpture and installation artist. And what I mean by installation artist is that I make works that inhabit and engage with space. I am primarily making work about my own diasporic experiences from growing up as an Uyghur born in London through a bodily perspective. And what I mean by bodily is that I am very interested in how sort of my feelings or my memories or my relationship to my Uyghurness is very much related to sensations and feelings with my body. Whether that be certain nostalgic memories, stimulating senses and bodily feeling, or even just the feeling uncomfortable within your identity, feeling disconnected from your identity, and how that manifests within the body. And I've been engaging that through mainly a sculptural practice because a sculptural practice involves my body in I guess the most basic form. It involves me working with my hands and really connecting to the works that I make physically as well. So yeah, I guess that gives an overview of my practice. It's kind of started as a therapeutic venture with me finding ways to expose my connection, disconnection to my heritage, as a way to just kind of redefine my own sense of belonging as well. So, yeah.
Definitely, yeah. I feel like this is a really common theme or feeling for Uyghurs in the diaspora, particularly, younger Uyghurs who were not born or raised in Weten. This kind of disconnect. Can you talk a little bit more about that because that's really interesting?
I feel like for me and a lot of Uyghur people who weren't born in Vatan, we already have this disconnection in terms of we didn't grow up with like these inherent core I guess memories and even just sensations, like for my parents, when I hear my parents talk about Vatan and their childhood, they have these memories that connect them to a land and a place that they call their hometown, you know, whether it's the heat or the city, or they connect with these memories on a very sort of physical level. And that is something that a lot of us who were born in the West have absent, that we're not able to connect on the same level and have these nostalgic memories. Like these memories that my parents have aren't nostalgic for me personally, but they're nostalgic like one step removed, if that makes sense. Like I'm experiencing nostalgia through them rather than just me being nostalgic about something directly. I think that that is a point of tension. Yeah, I guess insecurities and feelings of disconnection that can really sort of manifest when we're growing up, especially in countries where our identity seems to be invisible and really difficult to sort of define to other people, especially even just constantly explaining yourself and your heritage and where you're from. That constant self defining It kind of messed with my head growing up. Like, yeah, like it was almost like, do I even understand who I am at this point if no one else does? I guess that is literally the core manifestation of my art. The core manifestation of my art is these feelings of like discomfort, essentially discomfort within defining my own body as an Uyghur person, and what that even means for myself when I don't have these core experiences and memories and nostalgia from Uyghurs who were born and grew up in Vatan. Yeah, so that's kind of where I'm trying to come from with my art.
Absolutely, yeah. There's this what you said about experiencing this nostalgia through parents or family, people who have lived in Watan, this one step removed. I it's like a almost like a nostalgia for something you've never experienced. It's and I can really relate to that. This I was born in Khotan, but I lived most, if not all, of my life basically in Canada, and it's only until really recently where I've started to kind of come to terms or accept like this Uyghur identity, where I spent so long just trying to blend in and be Canadian, only to realize that people are complex and you can have identities that are multifaceted, and you don't have to reject one for the other. So that's really interesting. I was listening to the Talking to the Artist series, the part one, with the Taram Network, which you can find on YouTube, by the way, if you are interested in listening. And you talk about this like food, I guess, is this kind of big part of being Uyghur or experiencing this, and I guess that really strongly relates to the idea of these bodily experiences of identity. Can you speak more about that, this connection to food, and why it's so important to you, and why it might be important to just people in a diaspora?
When I started kind of engaging with an art practice like 2 years ago, I haven't been an artist for that long, and I was kind of thinking, okay, connection, disconnection. I started from disconnection, so I was like, okay, what are my connections then? What can I say? What can I think of that makes me feel certain of my Uyghurness? I very quickly came to food. It was the one thing that has been a constant throughout my life. I have grown up with like Uyghur food on rotation, cooked by my mom for the last 25 years. So it's the one thing that really grounds me to my heritage. And then when I started exploring that through sort of like a bodily perspective, it became super interesting, because I started thinking about how like the metaphor of food literally weighing my stomach down, grounding it into a sense of place. The way that it warms my body, makes me feel safe, makes me feel comfortable. And I really wanted to kind of explore those feelings. Even food in itself, the idea of sitting around a table and eating together, it's a family, a party, it's a way for people in the diaspora and within communities to connect with each other, sort of engage with sort of heritage and community building. So yeah, it just became a really interesting topic to explore my art through, and of course a very personal one, since I love my mom's cooking so much, and I'm sure every Uyghur person loves their parents' cooking so much. And I think my mom makes the best lakman and I would eat it like every day if I could. And yeah, it just kind of became a massive sort of theme and symbolism in my work. Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. I'm gonna have to disagree with you there. I think actually mom makes the best. So,
Yeah, everyone thinks their mom makes the best lakman. It's a thing.
when you talk about the Uyghur identity, how you perceive it, I suppose. This is a two-stage question. So, but I guess the first one is, how do you perceive Uyghurness or your Uyghur identity? What does it mean to you?
Exactly what I'm trying to figure out in my art. But no, it's a really difficult question to answer, because I think when you talk about Uyghurness, there is no clear sort of rule in being Uyghur. Like, you can't say, okay, if you have this sort of experience, that makes you Uyghur. If you have that sort of experience, that makes you Uyghur. It's really something that's very much more personal and visceral and within. I think it's just very much about like existing, being. And I think that's kind of why my art is so focused on these very visceral bodily experiences, because it's not just about me, you know, growing up with Uyghur cooking or growing up like I've engaged a bit with like Atlas patterns because I grew up seeing that as well, and it's not just those things that make me Uyghur, but it's also the discomfort that I've experienced growing up within a diaspora of my peers not understanding where I come from because they didn't even heard of the word Uyghur before, even where that is. It's my struggle with language and how that's affected me and my connection to my heritage. And I just feel like it's kind of all these things encompassed that kind of builds up, like, who I am as an Uyghur person. And I think that's what makes, like, so it goes to say that Uyghurness is a very unique thing to each person. And I think it's really important to kind of see it as that, as to see it as both the reality of connection and disconnection.
When you talk about this connection, disconnection, for you, was the connection to your Uyghurness, this identity, a gradual thing, or was it something that you had sort of always accepted, known? We talked earlier about, struggling or reconciling these facets of identity, and what was that like for you growing up?
I think being Uyghur was a really abstract concept when I was very young. I never really had a tangible grasp of what it meant, and that is probably because I didn't grow up with a very large community. I think the Uyghur community at the time was quite small in London, and like there wasn't many like other kids my age, and so I didn't really have that sort of like other Uyghur people to kind of, you know, I don't know, have that sort of support structure, I guess you could say. It always seemed so wishy-washy. I would say that I'm Uyghur, but I never really felt it. It was just kind of this fact that my parents told me, and I went through sort of throughout my teenage years of also just trying to kind of like ignore my heritage and not really think about it and try to fit in, and I would, lie about, where I came from because I just couldn't be bothered to go into a big explanation when I was a teenager, and I think that's relatable for a lot of Uyghur people around my age as well, and teenagers. And it took until, I guess, when I left secondary school to go to university and be put into a different environment, and kind of I spent the first year living away from home. I only went to university in London, so it wasn't that far away, but but like, at least I wasn't living at home and I was in a different environment. And I think I had all of a sudden, I guess, the change in environment, and it felt like more space to think about my identity. I think also at that age, people were a bit more sensitive about my identity and asking about my identity. And that was also roughly around the time, that was like 2017, when everything started happening in Veten. And so more and more people were more aware. The reality hitting me of, oh, I may not be able to go back anymore now, paired with sort of being put face to face with my heritage, kind of, yeah, set me off on this slow journey of yeah, exploring what being Uyghur means to me, essentially.
And you said that you haven't been an artist or haven't done this for too long, and so this was sort of a way for you to um, grapple with your own feelings about, Uyghur identity. What drew you to that? Were you always um, an artist, but just now this is sort of like a different perspective or shape to it?
Mhm. Yeah, I was a very creative person in secondary school. Everyone thought I was gonna go into art. I just didn't because I was also very academic and I went to do history instead. And I remember doing my dissertation on like Uyghur Buddhist patron portraits as kind of a starting point into engaging with that sort of heritage and Silk Road
That's very
history.
cool.
Yeah. um, and I just kind of realized that I felt a real need to engage with an art practice. And it was COVID as well during that time. So I had nothing to do and that's what I did. And I realized later on in hindsight, kind of looking about why did I choose that? Why didn't I stay in research? Or, why did I go into to become a fine artist? And I think that is just because I wanted to move beyond words in trying to explain, unpack, I guess, rather than explain, unpack kind of all these feelings. And because that's it, they're feelings. They're not, they can be hard to explain in words. And a lot of the topics that I was dealing with, like personally, were really difficult to actually explain and describe. And it felt fitting to kind of explain it in a much more practical way, using my hands, engaging with materials, kind of creating visual art as a way to be able to explain very difficult and hard to talk about feelings and topics. Um, yeah, so that's kind of so I didn't really start off my career as an artist. I started off as a historian, and I guess I just realized that words were quite difficult for me. So that's kind of how, I ended up in art.
Was there an influence in the background of history that you chose that kind of led to this? Is there some sort of maybe a pattern or a clear evolution from taking this studying history, focusing on the Buddhist portraits you said, and then that evolving from that to what you do now?
Yeah, I mean, I started making art about the Buddhist patron portraits and the cave paintings. That's literally where I started. I graduated from my BA in history. And it was COVID, and I just started sketching and painting and drawing images from these caves and these Uyghur patrons and kings and princesses from these caves. I then, during COVID, I got onto a year diploma course in art. That was half online, half in person. For the first task, they told me to experiment, and I went in as a painter and a drawer. And so I said, okay, I'll do a sculpture. I made a snake coiled up in like a latex stomach. So it was a ceramic snake coiled up in a latex stomach. And something just clicked from that point onwards. Something about trying to represent a feeling into a visual form using materials, something like the latex being like skin, and then the snake, clay snake kind of being heavy and stretching the latex and weighing it down. There was something, I just felt like there was such a narrative in that. And then I very quickly just kind of was like, yep, no, I'm doing this now. And then that just continued from there. Yeah.
So it was sort of like a switch almost.
Yeah.
As you yeah. Yeah, that's amazing. I wanted to ask first if you could talk a little bit rather about the patron paintings and the cave paintings. Because I'm
Yeah.
not familiar with this.
Okay. This was a while ago, so let me see if my memory serves me well.
Okay, sure. Let's do it.
But yeah, so I did my dissertation on motivations behind Uyghur patrons painting, like commissioning their own portraits to be painted in Buddhist cave paintings from the 9th to 12th, or no, the 11th to 12th century, I think, in the Dunhuang cave specifically. Um, and so I was specifically looking at portraits that were identified as being Uyghur, and basically why were they there. So I was looking into a lot of like religious motivations as well as political motivations, because there was an Uyghur king painted in there, and like I was engaging a lot with like the idea of political influence, or diplomatic relationships, and as well as just cultural influences as well, and the existence of Uyghur texts within these caves as well, and that was kind of what the dissertation was about. Yeah, it was a while ago, so I'm really tugging at my brain here to kind
No
of like
worries.
remember the specifics, but that was a general overview of
Yeah.
my dissertation.
Yeah, and what I suppose originally what interested you in studying that?
One thing was it was actually provided at my university. It like this popped up. It wasn't. I studied at University College London, but we were able to take intercollegiate modules, so we could go to a different like University of London, like like Goldsmiths or like King's College, and take a different module there. And then one popped up from Goldsmiths that was Silk Road. It was like Silk Road history. It was Buddhism and mindfulness on the Silk Road. It was called something like that. And I was like, oh, I've never had a chance to study like the basically the land that is like my heritage and where I come from, you know? Yeah, and this was again, I was having all these like building up desires of like wanting to reconnect with my heritage, and I kind of just started from there. And it was the only essay that I really enjoyed, which I think speaks volumes when you're actually studying something that is personal to you and means a lot to you. Yeah.
Yeah, you definitely feel like a motivation to actually do. It's not. It doesn't feel necessarily like work or homework or schoolwork. It's
Yeah.
you're getting your own thoughts and feelings out on this piece of paper.
No, exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Definitely. So you also, going back to your work as an artist here, in that video, the with the Taram Network talking to the artist, which if you haven't seen it, you can see it on YouTube at the Taram Network, or you can go to thetaramnetwork.com to find it. It's you talk about, or rather, the first video, you are working on this exhibition where you're creating these gourds. The gourds. There's one with a tongue. You do talk about the symbolism, the motif of snakes a lot, and I am very curious what that is to you. What do these symbols mean to you? What are the themes and the motifs that they carry for you? And
Yeah.
I guess to add on to that, two things: how would you want us rather to interpret these symbols? And the second one is, how do you apply that understanding of symbology, of symbolism, themes, motifs to other art? Essentially, how do you interpret art? Not necessarily related to Watan Uyghurs, but this general idea of when you see these themes repeated in artists that you respect, their work, how do you interpret these? Where do you come from it?
Wow. Yeah, big question. Okay, so I use a lot of repetitive imagery in my work as a way to kind of create narratives and add symbolism. And I guess I'll talk about the snakes first, because gourds are still something that it really encompasses my work still to this day. Snakes was very much a moment of that time, or when that video was made. I think I was just thinking a lot about mythology at that time and animals and ways that they're represented in mythology. So the idea of snake being something that is kind of inhabits both this like negative space and like positive space within mythology, being a very sort of like scary kind of animal, to being a symbolism of transformation and change. The idea of the snake shedding its skin. And that's where I really started focusing on really the action of a snake shedding its skin. Because I was creating a lot of shed snake skin from peeling like latex molds off from ceramic snakes that I've made. And this idea, again, the idea of skin and like the idea of shedding this uncomfortable skin, and I really like the symbolism of that, the symbolism of me doing the same in my work. I'm taking off this layer of uncomfortable skin, and I have this fresh skin where I'm able to kind of remake who I am, you know, in a way redefine who I am. And that's kind of what I was kind of specifically engaging with there. And the gourds were very much a nostalgic imagery for me. Like when I traveled back to Vietnam with my family on a few occasions when I was a child, that was one of the memories that kind of sticks with me, always seeing these gourds hung up in people's houses, seeing them in the bazaar, like seeing them everywhere. I was always intrigued by them because I guess they looked kind of cute to me as a child, and I was like, oh, I want one, you know. And I kind of started kind of thinking about them as an object. They're a vessel, that's what they used as. They hold things, they're hollow on the inside. They have references to the body as well. I mean, you know, my mom has called me Dut Kapak Bash before, and you know, the idea of that referencing the head and referencing the body. And I kind of started then thinking, using the gourd as a way to represent a vessel, like how the body is a vessel, like how a body can hold emotions, hold memories, you know. The body remembers, you know. That's one of the things that I think about a lot in my work, about how the body can remember experiences, and how I want to kind of use the gourd as a vessel in my art to hold memory, to hold emotion. And then that's kind of how I started using the gourd. You know, I would use the gourd as a stomach and stuff it with things to kind of represent fullness, or I'll create a gourd. I think the one in the exhibition, so I created a gourd hanging from the ceiling with loads of things coming out of it, kind of representing, the noodles and like salt dough noodles, latex noodles, you know. And then I created a gourd on the ground with a tongue coming out of it, kind of more in a nesting position. And like, that's kind of why I'm drawn to the imagery of the gourd, and I still am to this day. It's stuck with me. And in terms of how people then view that symbolism in my work, it's always an interesting question to think about, because when people view your work, especially with not really any context of who you are as an artist or any of the previous work that you've made, I've been told that, to understand your work, they need to know all the context. They need to know that you're Uyghur. They need to know like the context of Uyghurs, and you know, and I'm that to a certain extent, yes, but also like my work at the core is about narrating bodily feelings, and I think that's something that's universal to everyone can relate to these bodily feelings. And I feel like when someone sees like a gourd that kind of looks like a bursting stomach, they're able to immediately connect with that and connect their own memories to that and connect their own bodily memories and feelings to that. And then they ask about who I am and about my context. And I feel like that just kind of creates like a great stepping stone of like connection to my work. I guess apply the kind of same sort of thinking when I'm viewing other work and other repetitive symbolic features in other art. I'm always looking, at texture and at how these objects inhabit what they're doing. You kind of start from those basics to build up narratives. You don't always need to know like the context of the artist and these kind of factual things to kind of, I feel like it's more powerful to kind of have that narrative beforehand, because then you have more of a connection with the work, even if it's slightly different than what the artist is intending. Because I've had people like view my work and have their own emotional connection to it. Like, oh, this reminds me of this thing from my culture, and I've connected with it on that level. And even though I'm like, it's different than what I'm getting at, that's still important. I think that's still special, because even though it's we're coming at it from different angles, we do ultimately end up in the same space, which is nostalgia and connection to heritage. And yeah, so that's something that I find really important.
It sort of reminds me, it's argument that the interpretation or narrative of a piece of art, and who does it belong to? Does it belong to the author or the creator? Or once it's released to the public, does it belong to the people and the narratives or the interpretations that they associate with this piece of art? And I feel like that's something that you talked about, this idea that, you have a certain view or perspective on your art, but you don't mind when other people look at what you've created and see something about it that maybe comes from themselves and not necessarily from you.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly that,
And it brings me to this next question. You had said originally, this was I think a couple of years ago in those videos. You can see how much of my questions are informed by, because it's actually a quite in-depth, well done sort of documentary video series, which again, if you haven't seen and you're listening to this, you should definitely go check it out at thetaramnetwork.com or go to youtube.com and check out the Taram Network. It's talking to the artist Camilla Doshin. But anyway, to continue onward, you said that one thing that you are afraid of is this sort of your art coming from a source of trauma, it developing from a source of trauma, that you are exploring these feelings of bodily identity and the feeling of what it's like almost to be in a diaspora, but you don't want it to be informed by, the context of Uyghurs facing a genocide, that our kind of cultural heritage and identity at risk here. But I wanted to see, 2 years down the road, has your opinion or beliefs shifted on this? And if so, how have they been changed and what informed that?
Yeah, at the time when that video was made, I was really very sensitive about my work being viewed in a political context. I think that that's how I was kind of reacting to it. I was very much like, my work's not political, like I'm trying, I was kind of scared of, I guess, my work and my identity becoming about the genocide, because that's not useful to what I felt like the purpose of my art was in engaging with a sense of rebelonging and identity, like rebuilding, but as well as for other people to view me in a very like to view my art in more of a one-dimensional way, because I feel like a political narrative is incredibly strong, and as we can see, it's almost dominated what other people view. When other people view Uyghurs, the first thing that they think of is genocide, and that's kind of all as far as their mind goes. Yeah, I was very sensitive to that at that time. I was very worried because I guess I was just starting out really in my art practice, and I was kind of navigating this art world now, and I was like, oh, how am I going to be seen? And I wanted to be seen in a certain way. Now I'm kind of understanding how art can hold both spheres in a way. Um, that again, I think I mentioned in that video, I was kind of talking about how like I can't escape my own political context. You know, that still forms a part of how people read my work. But if they can read something else than that, then I feel like I've succeeded, and I still feel like my work's doing that. You know, that when people are viewing my work and maybe they approach my work with a context of what's happening to Uyghurs in Vatan, that my work is the existence of my work, they're able to kind of move beyond that narrative into learning a bit more about sort of diasporic identity as well, and the importance of community building, the importance of reconnecting to one's heritage as a form of resistance. I think that video kind of shows a really good snapshot of my anxieties at that time, coming out as an artist and being worried, and those anxieties have pretty much subsided. I do feel that my work does inhabit two spheres.
And I think that that's something that maybe a lot of Uyghurs who are working in not necessarily this advocacy or activism directly, but are working in the diaspora to either preserve elements of culture, to continue the Uyghur culture and identity in the diaspora and beyond. There's that struggle that they run into where obviously this political context, this humanitarian context that Uyghurs exist in is an existential one, and it's overpowering, it's dominating. But it also has this issue where it overshadows these other efforts by brilliant Uyghurs, artists, academics who are working so hard to ensure that the diaspora is itself this like thriving place of Uyghur culture and identity. And I think it's a bit of a shame, but it's shifting. I think this perspective, this narrative, and I also think that largely it's been a successful thing. Uyghurs in the diaspora have done an amazing job, really, about making sure that we're not a one-sided sob story or like a tragedy, but rather we're this expressive, full people who have a full identity and culture that just hasn't been explored because of the urgency of the crisis that we face today. I want to bring it back a little bit here and sort of talk about, again, your journey as a artist, as an Uyghur artist. And I wanted to ask you, if you were to do it again, what would you have done differently, perhaps? For Uyghurs out there, for people who are listening, who are passionate about the arts and want to put themselves out there, throw themselves into it. Should they do what you did, or would you advise them to take a different route?
Personally, would I do anything differently? No. But is my route the only one that you can take to having an artist career? No. As well, I very much did a career change, in a way, you could call it. I was going into academia. I was studying history, and then things very much shifted, changed, and I wanted to go into art. And that was really scary, actually. It seemed the art world and the art career seemed very like unattainable at the time, and seemed like this secret world. And like, how do I get into like the ranks of emerging artists when I don't have a portfolio and like, I don't have those connections. It can very much seem like it's all about connections in the art world, which to an extent it really is. I feel like despite those anxieties, there was, no need for me to study a BA, an undergrad in fine art. In a way, there was no need for me to study an MA in fine art, even though I went to did one. I think where I built up my networks, kind of managed to get the ball rolling in this career, is through just engaging with other artists, going to exhibitions, going to events, finding other artists that work in similar topics that I do. Like I was recently at an event that was about engaging with themes of rebelonging and talking about belonging, where some of us feel like we don't belong, or we don't belong to one place, and how do we engage, and just engaging with the artists who run that, the people who run that, and build up your connections in those ways. I mean, art school can be very useful for having an art studio and having resources and having the space to really experiment and make with your art. And I found that very useful as a sculpture artist, because I mean, my bedroom wasn't going to cut it, let's be honest, but I wouldn't do anything different. I know exactly why I wanted to do a master's, and I felt like really made use of my time there, and it's so sad to be gone. But yeah, I'm actually still there at the university doing a Wood Fellow. So in a way, I've never left. It can be very daunting, I feel like, starting an art career. But really, it's just about making a coherent body of work and engaging with artists that kind of get what you're making and get you, and are also working with similar themes, and really fruitful conversations can come from that. Because building an art practice takes time. Figuring out your art practice takes time. It took me 3 years now to get to this point, and probably 2 years was spent figuring it all out still.
How would you describe this journey that you've had about kind of accepting, resolving, and expressing Uyghur identity, and that there are young Uyghurs out there who were born in the diaspora and have never been to Weten. Their context for Uyghurness and Uyghur is the people that are around them, and now there's this incredible new resources like the Tarim network that exist to connect these Uyghurs who maybe even like 5 years ago might have just been completely isolated from the rest of the Uyghur community. So for people who are sort of trying to figure out how to resolve, combine, merge, fuse, or understand what it is to be Uyghur in the diaspora, what does that mean specifically to you, I guess more explicitly, and how did you get there over time? I guess what I'm asking now is a more explicit definition of the identity to you, which I think can be a little difficult to put into words, as you said.
My Uyghurness is very much my own.
It is a personal thing for everyone right now.
Does that work as a definition?
It might. Yeah.
I feel like it's been sort of a very personal journey. I mean, there's more tangible things that I've been able to kind of connect with, like, for example, connect with storytelling from my parents, my mum telling her stories of her growing up, her memories, to me practicing my Uyghur chair, trying to figure that out, as well as, I guess, really just feeling comfortable as an Uyghur person. Because I think growing up with these language insecurity and just not knowing what being Uyghur meant, and not feeling that I was able to self-define myself to other people, has led me to feel almost inadequate. Like, how can I feel comfortable calling myself Uyghur? And now I'm in a stage where I'm like, well, no matter if, like, you're struggling with the language or you don't have these memories of Weten, I mean, you're still Uyghur. I'm forming my own ways of being Uyghur. which I feel like is through my art. And it's happening right now. I mean, other people in the diaspora are doing the same thing as well, whether it's through their research or whether they're engaging with sort of like community outreach and events and things like that. We're all in the diaspora sort of redefining but we're all just engaging in new ways of feeling Uyghur when we are disconnected from Vatan, when we aren't able to visit, when we're having our culture and identity very much challenged and targeted. I think the most powerful thing to do is to feel pride and to feel comfortable in expressing in who we are, however that may be.
Yeah, I agree. I think actually I phrased the question improperly in a bad way. But you, I think, have answered a better question in a very good way. So thank you.
No worries.
Yeah, I appreciate that. We're kind of coming up against the hour mark here, but I wanted to ask you about if any works, anything you have upcoming, or anything that you want people to check out of your work, and where they might find it.
You can find me on Instagram at Camilla Dilshot. I also have a website, which is just CamillaDilshot.com. So you could sort of look at my art. You can follow my Instagram to keep updated with anything that's coming up. In terms of things that's coming up, I am very much in my dip phase. I did a lot of exhibitions since graduating. I was kind of riding the wave, got a little burnt out. Now everything's kind of died down. So I'm very much in a space where I'm making time for myself to create a new body of work over the summer and early autumn. And then, so nothing lined up specifically. I will have an exhibition next year with my university that I did my master's at, because I'm the Wood Fellow there. So I'll be doing sort of a little mini showing some of my work with the graduating master's students. But apart from that, nothing specific, but hopefully a new body of work, and then hopefully exciting things to come after that.
Fantastic. Yeah, we should stay tuned for the new body of work. But I just wanted to ask real quick, you mentioned it a couple of times. What is the Wood Fellow?
Oh, the Wood Fellow, yeah. I explained that with no context. It's kind of like a residency. My university, where I did my MA at City and Guilds of London Art School, they run a couple of fellowships. So they have a Glass Fellow, a Print Fellow, they have a Wood Fellow, which is what I am. And so essentially it's sort of, I engage with the wood workshop, with the students there, with the tutors there. I help them on their projects, and I help tutors on their projects, and I also work on my own practice alongside that. So I've been, for the past year, and now for next year as well, I've been developing my woodworking practice, kind of learning new techniques, engaging with like the wood carvers on site, kind of asking advice from them. I've been learning joinery techniques and adding that into my art practice. So yeah, exciting things. And then hopefully that will kind of, influence a new sort of body of work. But yeah, that's what that is.
Fantastic. Is there a book that you're reading right now that you want to share or recommend to others?
I am reading a book right now, but I'm not going to recommend it.
Okay.
Because I don't really understand it, but I'm getting through it. But in terms of books in general, I guess if you're interested in kind of learning about sort of the ideas of where my art practice came from, The Skin of the Film. Can't remember who it's by. I think the title is The Skin of the Film. It's a great book. It's about film artworks rather than like sculptures or like paintings, but it very much engages with the idea of memory moving beyond the visual and being a sensory experience, and how film, and especially film from diasporic artists, are able to kind of engage with that and generate nostalgia through sort of sensory stimuli through film. So that's a great book that I would recommend. And there's probably a lot of other really interesting books, but that's the only one that I can think of from the top of my head right now.
Sure, fair enough. Yeah, that sounds really interesting. Actually, I wish I had a little more time to ask about that, because film as being a sensory experience, or memory rather, as a sensory experience beyond just the visual. That sounds interesting. Um, if you had one tip, if you could go back, 5 years, to give yourself one big thing that you would tell yourself, what would it be?
Don't be so worried, I guess is my big one. Yeah, that's all I have to say about that. Don't be so worried.
Yeah, that's a pretty big one. That's a really big one. And if you had one tip for aspiring young artists?
Make work, get it out there, get reactions, get feedback, like that. Like, honestly, even if you're in a rut, even if you don't believe in what you're making right now, like, you really just have to push through, make that work. Because once you start having those conversations with other people on the internet, or with your peers, or with other artists that you've made friends with, about what you've made, why is it not working, starting those conversations is so fruitful and so beneficial. You realizations can come over you like a wave, and then it's really really helps you to kind of figure things out. So that's my advice.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much, Camilla, for coming on to Taram Talks and speaking with me.
Thank you.
I really appreciate it. This was a great discussion. I really enjoyed hearing from you and learning from you, and I am sure that our audience will as well. And again, if people wanted to reach you, if that's okay, what would be the best way to do so?
My Instagram DMs are always open. That's probably the easiest way to reach me. So yeah.
Fantastic. And we'll put some links up in our show notes for people, so that they can see your work, as well as, if they are interested, to follow, keep up with you, and to ask you questions if they have any, and if you're willing to answer them. Again, thank you, Camilla, and remember to subscribe to the Taram Network on YouTube. If you're watching this on YouTube as a video format, make sure that you follow us on whatever podcast app that you're using. If you're listening to us in an audio format, make sure to give Camilla a follow, and make sure to keep up with updates at thetaramnetwork.com for new events, courses, anything else interesting, and for the latest episodes of Taram Talks. Thank you again. I'm your host, Bob Riochi. Thank you, Camilla, very much.